Have you ever bought a first-class ticket with your own hard-earned money, only to be asked to prove do you deserve to be there? And in just a few short minutes, the respect you thought you had is gone, just because of the color of your skin, because of the way you look, or because someone believes you don't belong there. That is the story of Jordan A. Pierce, a black CEO who boarded the plane like any other passenger. But after just 12 minutes, he was forced to make a heartbreaking choice: stay silent to be left alone, or stand up to maintain his own dignity. If you were him, what would you do? Would you bow your head and step back into the back seat? Or would you stay where you are, keeping your belief that people cannot be judged by prejudiced eyes? And most importantly, how many times in your life have you remained silent in the face of injustice, simply because you were afraid of getting into trouble? Come join us in the story. A story not just about a flight, but about our self-respect. If you believe that dignity is not something that needs to be proven, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to support stories that touch the heart. Late afternoons at Denver International Airport often have a strangely peaceful quality. The tall glass windows of the terminal reflect the fading sunlight, creating long, silent golden streaks on the stone floor. People still come and go, walking steadily. But no one is in a hurry, no one is rushing. The rhythm of the transition between day and night always gives the place a very pleasant feeling, as if everything is breathing slowly after a long day. NorthStar Flight 282 opened its boarding gates at 6:05 p.m. A long line of passengers slowly filed into the Boeing 737 MAX cabin. The sounds of suitcases being dragged, shoes clicking on the floor, greetings mixed with the steady hum of the air conditioning. Everything seemed normal, so peaceful. But sometimes, the most special things happen at seemingly peaceful moments like this. Jordan Pierce stood at the door of the plane, first-class boarding pass in hand, peering into the row of seats in front of him. He wore a dark blue denim shirt, ash gray cotton pants, and worn leather shoes. No fancy watch, no tie, no expensive suit that one might imagine when one thinks of a successful man. He seemed like a normal guy, a man coming off a long work week, wanting to get home to Chicago in time for an early meeting tomorrow. No one knew. No one would guess that he was the CEO of NorthStar Airlines, the company that operated the very plane they were about to board. And he liked it. He liked being normal. Jordan stepped into the cabin, glancing up to see how the soft yellow light fell on each seat. A light that reminded him of the nights his father would spend mending under an old desk lamp. Soft, not blinding, not pretentious, just enough to see, enough to feel. He walked to seat 1A and placed his shoulder bag neatly at his feet. The flight was less than 2 hours long, but this was a moment he had been looking forward to all week, a moment of silence. A few minutes to breathe in slowly, then release deeply. To let his body relax from the tension of endless meetings, metrics reports, decisions that could affect thousands of people with just a slight tilt. The cabin filled up. Men in suits entered, breaking the silence with gruff phone calls. A young couple carried a baby a few months old, the scent of baby powder lingering in the air. A thin, white-haired old man sat in seat 2C, head bowed, reading USA Today. Everything was normal, until his eyes first fell on Jordan. It was Samantha Hale, the check-in clerk who had just finished filling out the boarding list. She looked at Jordan with a flicker of confusion that was hard to explain. There was something about her gaze that sent a chill down Jordan's spine, a familiar, old feeling, one he'd experienced countless times in his life. A look of judgment, the look of someone used to judging based on appearances. Jordan let out a small breath. Not today, he told himself. He didn't want a confrontation. He just wanted peace. But life sometimes does not ask our opinion. Samantha approached, bowing slightly as if it were a routine procedure. "Sir, I just need to verify your seat information." Her voice was soft, but there was no hiding her reserve. Jordan handed her his boarding pass without saying anything. He wasn't upset, but his eyes narrowed slightly, a sign only the most perceptive could pick up. He'd been through this all his life, people doubting he was worthy of the seat he'd paid for. But years of experience had taught him to take a deep breath, then patiently respond with calm. Samantha looked at the ticket, then at him, then back at the ticket, as if a black person sitting in first class was something that needed triple verification. Jordan adjusted his collar. It was a small action, but it gave him a little more steadiness. The cabin was still moderately noisy. People talking, glove compartments closing, bags clattering against seats. But for a few seconds, Jordan felt as if a thick membrane had covered all the sounds. All he could hear was his heartbeat slow, steady, but strangely deep. For years, he had tried to keep his heart quiet. Quiet in the face of contempt. Quiet in the face of doors being slammed shut because of the color of his skin. Quiet in the face of eyes saying, "I probably don't belong here." But today, something was different. Samantha pursed her lips and handed him his ticket back. "I'll need to check with the flight attendant," she said quietly. Jordan just nodded. He didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but deep inside, a pang arose, a feeling that anyone who had been overlooked would understand all too well. Just then, in the tense silence, the cabin suddenly erupted into an intercom. A trembling voice. "Captain Rodriguez, please come to the cabin. Immediately. We need you." The plane looked up. Passengers lowered their cell phones. A slight but sharp shudder passed through the cabin, like a storm coming. Jordan raised his head and looked straight toward the cockpit door. His eyes were calm, yet filled with an indescribable fatigue. Little did he know that in just a few minutes, this entire flight and the entire country would be talking about him. But at this moment, he only heard a very small, very quiet thought in his head. Here we go again. As the captain's call ended, the atmosphere in the cabin suddenly froze. Some passengers exchanged glances. Others checked their passports or boarding passes without any reason. There are moments when no one speaks. But everyone knows what is about to happen is not a small matter. Jordan sat still in seat 1A, back straight, hands folded in his lap. He looked out the window, watching the trucks drive by in a straight line below. A last ray of sunlight shone on his face, giving him just the right warmth. He told himself everything would be okay, like it always was, like he hoped. But his heart was still heavy. Less than 2 minutes later, Samantha returned. She walked quickly, but tried to keep her expression neutral, as if the action were just part of the process. Jordan saw it clearly, though there was confusion in her eyes. The kind of confusion that comes from people who have made mistakes but haven't had the courage to admit it. She stood beside his chair, her hands clasped before her chest. "Sir, to make sure everything is correct, I need to review your paperwork one more time." His voice sounded soft, but it lacked conviction. Jordan said nothing. He just slowly reached into his wallet and pulled out 2 pieces of identification, his driver's license and his NorthStar Airlines Diamond Elite membership card. He handed it to her slowly. Still, his eyes said enough that he understood what was going on, and that he was tired of this kind of treatment. Samantha took the papers and glanced at them. Then she glanced at his face. Then she glanced back down at the papers. Each glance pricked Jordan's patience. She asked, "Do you have a credit card to buy the ticket I need to verify the transaction?" Jordan narrowed his eyes and tried to keep his voice light. "You checked the transaction at the check-in gate?" He knew she remembered. He remembered the look on her face when she swiped his card. "What else do you want to check now?" Samantha looked startled. She smiled wryly, as if to ease the tension between them. Just to confirm, the process sometimes requires additional testing." Jordan looked at her for a long moment. "Procedure," he reminded her softly. A simple word, but enough to make her feel uneasy. In that moment, his mind drifted back to his old days when he was a teenager on Chicago's South Side, often followed by store clerks who thought he might steal. When he first started working, when security stopped him at the door of his high-level office because they thought he didn't belong on the management floor, and when he first entered first class on another flight, and the flight attendant asked him 3 times if he was sure we're on the right plane. Those things are too familiar. but familiar does not mean it doesn't hurt. Samantha returned the documents, but her face was still a little tense. She hesitated for a few seconds before continuing. Please wait here. Our chief flight attendant will verify immediately. Jordan nodded. Okay. But in his heart, there was a feeling as heavy as a stone because he knew once they started to suspect, it wouldn't stop at just one check. A short while later, Andrew Clark, the chief steward, walked in with an air of authority. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform immaculately pressed. The way he looked at Jordan wasn't surprise, but defensive, as if Jordan had been a problem all along. Good evening, sir, Andrew said, his voice a little stiff. We have received notice that there is a discrepancy in your ticket records. Could you please stand up for a few minutes so we can check further? Jordan didn't move. He looked up slowly. My ticket is valid. They've checked it 3 times. I'm sitting in my correct seat, 1A. Andrew frowned. Sir, this is a security procedure. You need to stand up to Jordan interrupted, his voice still soft but sharp. Security. If this is a security issue, then tell me clearly what I am suspected of. Andrew hesitated. It was obvious he had no answer. But someone like Andrew wouldn't admit that easily. You're slowing down boarding. It's affecting the whole flight. His voice started to get harsh. Jordan looked deep into his eyes. Then tell me exactly why you doubt me. Andrew was confused for exactly a second, then tried to cover it up with a cold voice. This is just standard procedure. Jordan closed his eyes briefly. There was that word again. Procedure. Every time they said that word, he felt like he was being pulled back from the position he had worked for decades to get to. And even though he was used to it, getting used to it did not mean accepting it. Jordan opened his eyes and looked at Andrew for a long time. I won't get up. If you have anything else to check, do it here. I've given you all the paperwork. I won't move. Andrew stiffened. He was not used to being rejected, not used to someone so calm and so determined. The air around them seemed to tense. Nearby passengers began to take notice. Some looked at Jordan with concern, others with annoyance, as if he were deliberately trying to stir up trouble. Andrew turned away to call someone. Jordan exhaled slowly. Why? Jordan, he wondered. At this age, with this much success, do I still have to explain that I belong where I paid to belong? It was a painful question, and he had been asking it all his life. But little did he know, the biggest answer was coming closer than he thought. Andrew left his first-class seat, walking quickly and briskly as if he had just discovered a hole in the fuselage. The radio strapped to his waist flashed red, swaying with each movement. Everyone around him was quick to notice that something was off, though no one really understood what was going on. Jordan watched Andrew slowly, his eyes flickering with tired resignation. He wasn't a hothead, nor was he accustomed to demanding special privileges. He'd always believed that people were just uninformed, that in some situations people were just doing their jobs wrong. But this time, something weighed heavier on his heart, the kind of look he'd seen all his life, and Andrew had just given him that exact look. Jordan tilted his head slightly to the side, as if to get a glimpse of the faces of the people around him. A blonde woman in seat 1C was looking at him with a worried expression. Her lips slightly parted, as if she wanted to say something but stopped. Next to her, a middle-aged man shook his head slightly, as if to say what a bother. Just want to get the flight over with. Jordan understood. In many situations, people were divided into 2 categories, the ones you loved and the ones you hated. And sometimes, people mistakenly chose him as the latter. There was a soft hiss as Andrew turned. Behind him was another flight attendant, a younger man, his name barely visible on his uniform tag. Eli Turner. Eli had a gentle face, the kind of man who always wanted to resolve things with kindness. But today, he had clearly been drawn into an unwanted confrontation. Andrew stopped in Jordan's row, took a breath as if preparing to give an evacuation order. Sir, he said. His voice changed sharper, higher, more impatient. Your ticket status is still showing signs of abnormality. I need you to stand up and step aside so we can check. Jordan still didn't move. He looked up at Andrew, his eyes calm but hidden by a thin layer of ice. I told you and I've given you all the documents. If you need to verify, you can do it right here. Andrew squeezed the radio strap, trying to maintain control. You're interfering with procedures. You're slowing the flight. Jordan exhaled, a soft, even breath, but with a dull weariness in it. Slow, he repeated. For me? The question was as light as a breath, but it made Eli, who had been standing behind Andrew, wince slightly. Observant observers would understand the question was not meant to be a nuisance. It was simply a reminder, a pang from someone who had been judged too many times based on appearances. Andrew continued, You're not cooperating. This is a commercial flight. You have to. Jordan interrupted, more clearly this time, but still keeping his voice low. I'm not cooperating. Or do you not accept the fact that I belong in this seat? The air around them suddenly became thin, as if the air conditioning had slowed down. A man in the back row raised an eyebrow. A young girl even let go of her seatbelt to look over. Eli opened his mouth, as if wanting to intervene before things got worse, sir. I believe there's a misunderstanding here. We just need to make sure. Jordan looked at Eli, his eyes softening a little. What's certain that a man like me can't fly first class? Eli was silent. Andrew was not. Don't make a big deal out of this. Andrew growled. If you keep sitting here like this, you'll be considered a troublemaker. Jordan tilted his head slightly. Causing trouble. He repeated the words slowly. Perhaps in that brief moment, so many old memories came flooding back. Was it true that just by appearing in a place where people weren't used to seeing someone like him, he automatically became a troublemaker? Andrew propped himself up on the chair and leaned closer. You're making everyone uncomfortable. Could you stand? The word stand rang out like a command. A familiar command in familiar context that Jordan had spent his life escaping. He looked up, his dark eyes deep but very calm. I am not getting up. This is my chair. I have given my papers. I have paid. I am not going anywhere. His voice was not high, not challenging, just determined. Sometimes, decisiveness doesn't require raising your voice, just not wavering. Andrew stiffened. Eli swallowed. Several passengers held their breaths. Jordan leaned back in his chair, and his hands were clasped together in front of his stomach, almost meditative. There was no anger in him, no loud protest. Just a man who had stood firm against too many headwinds, and this time, he chose not to move. The silence made Andrew even more uneasy. He pressed the radio. We need Captain Rodriguez in first class immediately. His voice shook slightly, not because he was afraid of Jordan, but because he felt control slipping away. When the radio turned off, in the moment the cabin fell silent. Jordan saw himself in the reflection of the window. The afternoon light had faded, only a thin streak of light remained on the glass. And he wondered, how many more times in my life will I have to prove that I deserve a seat? That I bought an unanswered question? A question that millions of Black Americans ask every day. Andrew stood up straight, trying to hide his embarrassment. Okay, let's wait for Captain. You'll have to explain then, Jordan replied breezy. I'll tell you exactly what happened. Nothing more. Nothing less. Eli looked at Jordan for a few more seconds. There was a pang in his eyes. He didn't seem to agree with Andrew, but he wasn't in a position to speak up. People like Eli were always in the middle, as in between right and wrong, between silence and intervention. Sometimes, people like Eli are society's test. Do we choose to stand on the side of what is right, or step aside to keep our peace? Jordan watched them leave. It felt like a thin layer of dust light, but annoying. Hard to brush off, but not suffocating. He was used to it. Too used to it. He just didn't expect that today. That layer of dust would swirl into a storm. And you, the one who just wants to sit still, will be at the center of that storm. When Andrew's radio went silent, the cabin felt thick. Some passengers leaned forward, trying to figure out what had just happened, while others shifted nervously in their seats. The scent of coffee wafted from a paper cup from a passenger in the row behind them, mixed with the air conditioning a distinct smell that Jordan had always found normal. But today, it felt oppressive. Jordan slowly placed his hands on his knees, as if to remind himself to keep his balance. There was a feeling he couldn't quite name, not quite angry, not quite sad, just tired. Very tired. The kind of tiredness that came from unwanted confrontations that kept repeating themselves, even though he'd tried to avoid them all his life. In seat 1C, the blonde woman Linda Morrow looked hesitantly at Jordan. She twisted the wedding ring on her finger, her eyes searching for words of comfort, but afraid of intervening at the wrong time. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, loud enough for only the two of them to hear. Jordan nodded slightly. "Thank you. I'm fine." But Linda knew he was wrong. Anyone who had ever been looked down upon for their looks would know that. Behind him, someone let out an annoyed laugh. A large man in row 2A. Robert Tate, burgundy shirt, slightly askew tie, shaked his head, saying loud enough for many to hear, "This is never going to take off. Just because one person doesn't follow the rules?" Jordan didn't turn back, but the other passengers did. A few glances began to shift from curiosity to irritation. This was what Jordan was most worried about. Not Andrew's voice, not the approaching footsteps of the captain. It was the crowd. Crowds are easily pulled in one direction, and people like you are often the first to be blamed. Heavy footsteps echoed from the front. Eli Turner returned to the first-class row, standing in the gap between the two rows. His face was troubled, as if trying to balance the duty of his job with the growing unease inside him. Eli leaned over and whispered, his voice truly sincere, sir? "I think it will be fine. It's just that the captain wants to take a closer look." Jordan looked at Eli. "Do you think I did something wrong?" Eli faltered, eyes downcast. I don't think so. But you know, sometimes there are misunderstandings." "Misunderstanding," Jordan repeated, barely a breath. "Do you know how many misunderstandings I've had in my life, and they're usually with a certain type of person?" Eli looked up. Understanding was slow but clear in his eyes. He said nothing more. From behind, there was the sound of a chair creaking, and then a middle-aged woman's voice rang out. "This is so annoying. We've already paid, and we have somewhere to go. Why don't they hurry up and get this over with?" Such words were not malicious, but they unintentionally pushed Jordan into the role of troublemaker. He felt his chest tighten. Then something unexpected happened. A young woman in row 3F stood up, her black hair tied up, phone in hand. It was Mia Torres. She took a few steps forward, standing less than 3 rows away from Jordan. Mia's voice was small but clear. "I just want to say, I've been recording since he sat down. And up until now, he hasn't done anything wrong." The whole cabin turned to look at her. Andrew turned around, his voice immediately becoming tense. "Ma'am, filming is not allowed in the cabin. Put the phone away." Mia didn't back down. "So, give me a law that forbids it. I'll listen." Andrew opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no rules, and he knew it. Jordan looked at Mia, his eyes softening a little. The intervention of others, no matter how small, could bring hope. A hope that sometimes there would still be someone who dared to stand up when others were pushed to the wall. However, that intervention also makes the cabin more polarizing. Robert Tate snorted. "Why are you defending him? He clearly doesn't belong there." The words were like a knife stabbing into Jordan's chest. Linda Morrow immediately turned to Robert. "Sir, that's his seat. You have no right to judge who belongs there." Robert pouted. "You can defend whoever you want, but I don't believe someone who looks normal like that could buy a first-class ticket at this hour." Mia took a deep breath. "That's called prejudice," Robert laughed. "Whatever you say." I just want to fly. He's holding us all back. Jordan sat still. He didn't turn to look at Robert. He didn't respond. He didn't get angry. He just listened. And the pain in his heart dropped silently like a stone falling into water. Silent, but heavy enough to ripple the surface. Andrew interrupted again, his voice annoyed. I don't want to argue anymore. Captain will come and settle it right now. Just then, decisive footsteps echoed from the cockpit door. Not fast, not slow, but loud enough for everyone to recognize power was approaching. Captain Luis Rodriguez appears. The captain's cap was in his hand, his dark blue uniform perfect in every crease. His eyes swept over Jordan, over Andrew, over Mia, over the waiting passengers. The cabin fell silent, the kind of silence where one could hear one's own breathing. Jordan felt the air around him thicken. He clasped his hands together not in fear but in preparation. He understood the storm had begun, and the eye of the storms was heading towards him. Captain Luis Rodriguez stood there, at the front of the first-class cabin, his posture erect, his shoulders broad, his face tanned by years of intercontinental flying. The soft yellow light cast a solemn look on his uniform. When he took 2 more steps forward, the entire cabin held its breath. Jordan looked straight at the captain. No avoidance, no bow, no defiance, just standing firm in his composure. Rodriguez looked around the cabin for a few seconds before focusing his gaze on Jordan. There was something familiar in that gaze power. He took a deep breath and said, his voice low, short, and firm. Good evening, sir. I am Captain Luis Rodriguez. I have been informed that you are not cooperating with the flight crew. I need to hear from you what is going on. Jordan kept his voice light. I'm sitting in my seat. I have my papers. I have no problem with cooperating. I just don't want to leave my seat without a good reason. Rodriguez tilted his head slightly, as if trying to parse each word. Andrew interjected before Jordan added, Captain. This passenger refuses to move despite our request to do so per security procedures. He is disrupting the flight. Procedure, Jordan whispered. He looked away from Andrew and straight at the captain. If this is a security matter, Captain, please tell me what I am suspected of. A moment of silence. Passengers have no right to question security during screening, Rodriguez replied, unfazed. You just have to cooperate. Jordan felt his chest tighten. He had heard it too many times. The kind of phrase that makes any conversation a one-way street power speaks you shut up. But today he did not keep quiet. Captain, Jordan said slowly, each word distinct. I have all my papers. You can look them up if you want. I have not broken any rules. And I am not leaving this chair unless you give me a specific reason. Captain Rodriguez's face changed slightly, not because Jordan was disrespectful, but because he wasn't shaking. Rodriguez looked at Andrew. Did he really give all the papers? Andrew nodded quickly, avoiding eye contact. Yes, but I feel something is wrong. I think we should take a closer look. Not okay, Jordan asked, his voice low enough only to be heard across the cabin. Not okay? In what way? The question made some passengers shudder. It was a question few dared to ask. And the captain, despite his power, had no easy answer. Rodriguez stood still for a moment. Then he said, Sir, you are delaying your flight. I can ask you to leave the plane. This is my right under the regulations. Linda Morrow gasped. Oh my God. Robert Tate snorted, looking pleased. Finally, someone took care of it. Jordan heard it all. He didn't respond. He looked straight at the captain. There was a deep stillness in his eyes, the stillness of someone who had lived long enough with irrational judgments to know that standing firm was the right thing to do. Captain Rodriguez? I ask again. He said, What is your specific reason for asking me to leave the plane? Rodriguez tightened his grip on his hat. Failure to comply, he replied stiffly. Jordan smiled slightly, not happily, but sadly. A very thin, very deep smile. I have complied with everything. I just refuse to leave my rightful place without proof that I am wrong. Rodriguez stepped closer, standing less than a foot away from Jordan. Sir, he said, his voice as taut as a zipper, I'm going to say this for the last time. If you don't stand up, I'm going to have security remove you from the plane immediately. His words fell like a thump across the cabin. A woman gasped. Someone dropped a water bottle. No one spoke. No one moved. Andrew stood behind the captain, his face slightly contorted as if he were about to smile in satisfaction. Eli looked at Jordan, his eyes clearly worried. Jordan felt his heart sink, not from fear of being dismissed, not from shame, but from that all-too-familiar feeling of being judged before being heard. He lowered his eyes for a moment. Then he looked up. There was the stillness of a lake in his eyes, and beneath the lake, the resolve of a mountain. Captain, he said, his voice so low that the cabin had to tilt its ears to hear. I am not leaving this seat. Rodriguez's eyes widened. You are defying my direct orders. I'm not against it, Jordan replied, each word as firm as a vein of stone. I just don't accept injustice. If you have specific reasons, I'll stand up. But if this is just sentiment, I'm sorry, Captain, I'm not going anywhere. The cabin erupted in whispers. Linda clapped her hand over her mouth. Mia held the phone higher, her hand shaking slightly. Robert Tate called out to someone indistinctly, See there. There? This is the kind of passenger who causes trouble, Rodriguez narrowed his eyes, the veins in his neck standing out. He turned to Andrew and said loudly, Call security. Space vibrates. Jordan closed his eyes for half a second, not to surrender, but to gather whatever composure he had. Then he opened them and said something no one in the cabin was prepared to hear. If you call security, you're putting the whole flight in bigger trouble than you think. Rodriguez stepped closer, so close that their breaths touched. Are you threatening me? His voice trembled with anger. Jordan shook his head. No, I'm warning you. The air is so thick it can be cut with a knife. Rodriguez gritted his teeth. You have no right to warn me on my plane. Jordan looked him straight in the eyes. His eyes were eerily calm. Captain, Jordan said slowly, his voice as deep as a bass drum in a closed room. You don't know who I am. Do you? The cabin was dead silent. Even the sound of the wind outside the wing seemed to have slowed down. Rodriguez wavered. I treat every passenger the same. I don't care who you are. Jordan nodded slightly, his lips curving up in a very thin smile, a smile that wasn't happy, but meaningful. Well then, he said, perhaps I'm about to find out. The moment Jordan said you might find out, the entire cabin held its breath. No one moved. No one blinked. Even Captain Rodriguez paused for a split second, though he tried to cover it up with a firmer hand on his hips. He looked Jordan up and down, as if trying to determine whether he was a regular passenger or a bigger problem than he had imagined. But what he was met with was a look of unnerving calm. Jordan said nothing more. He simply sat upright, his hands in his lap, his body completely still. His stillness was neither defiant nor provocative. It was the stillness of someone accustomed to keeping his composure lest he be misunderstood. Beside him, Linda Morrow gripped the armrest tightly and whispered, Captain, please think carefully. But Rodriguez didn't respond. He was too carried away by his ego to listen to anything. Andrew Clark blinked repeatedly, as if trying to hide his anxiety behind a stiff expression. Eli Turner stood behind him, his hands clasped together. He didn't know what to do, but his gut feeling was telling him things were going wrong. Mia Torres kept her phone in her hand, recording every moment, not for views, not for drama, but because she felt something was wrong. Clearly wrong. Rodriguez finally spoke, his voice low but full of pressure, sir. I ask you to stand up now. This is the final order. If you do not comply, I will call airport security to board the plane. Jordan didn't answer quickly. He rolled his neck slightly, as if to relieve the tension in his shoulders, a habit he had whenever his heart felt heavy. Then he spoke slowly. I just want to ask Captain one question. Rodriguez gritted his teeth. Speak. Are you asking me to leave the plane for security reasons? Or because of your and the crew's personal feelings towards me? The question fell on the cabin like a dry clap of thunder. No one said anything. Rodriguez inhaled sharply. His sharp eyes seemed to want to pierce straight into Jordan. Are you saying I discriminate? Jordan replied, his voice very soft, but each word resonated clearly like a beat in his chest. I didn't say that. I just asked what the real reason was. Andrew immediately interjected, Captain, there's no need to argue. Just call security. He's clearly not cooperating. Eli took a step back, not daring to face Andrew. But his eyes found Jordan in an unspoken apology. Jordan didn't turn to Andrew. He just looked at the captain. You can call security. But remember, everything is being recorded. And whatever decision you make, you will have to explain it in the end. Rodriguez closed his eyes for a second. He was angry. Really angry. But not just because Jordan was defying him. It was because of something deeper. Something that made him feel challenged in front of the whole cabin. The crowd began to divide more strongly. A woman's voice. He didn't do anything wrong. He was just sitting. A man's voice from behind said, Don't make a big deal out of it. Just send him down. Another. He has been extremely calm since he came up. I don't understand why they have to do that. The voices weren't directed at Jordan, but at Rodriguez, and he felt it. It was the first time in years that his authority in the cabin was shaken by the eyes of passengers. Rodriguez turned to Andrew Call Security. His voice was hoarse as if he had just cut off his last hope. Andrew immediately brought the radio to his mouth. Dispatch, we need security in the first-class cabin. Wait. Jordan's voice rose, light but sharp as a knife cutting through the wind. Andrew paused. Rodriguez narrowed his eyes. What else do you want to say? Jordan gently took the phone from his vest pocket. No rush. No fanfare. He opened the screen. His finger slid to a contact whose name was highlighted in dark blue NorthStar Executive Office. Direct line? He said. His voice not loud, but each syllable resounded with weight. If you have decided to call security, I should also call someone with authority to handle this matter at a higher level than you. Rodriguez stiffened. The passengers fell silent. Mia held the phone higher. Linda put her hand to her mouth. Robert Tate exclaimed, What is this? Are you picking a fight? Jordan didn't look at anyone. Just at the captain? You said I had no right to question you. I understand. But someone has a right to ask you why you treat your customers this way. Rodriguez felt sweat on the back of his shirt. Are you threatening me with power? He said quickly. Jordan shook his head. I didn't threaten anyone. I just did what every passenger has the right to do when they've been treated unfairly. I called the operator. Rodriguez opened his mouth to say something, but it was too late. Jordan pressed call. The phone rang. Once. Twice. The whole cabin held its breath. On the third ring, a woman's voice rang out. This is Amanda Brooks, Executive Advisor to NorthStar Airlines. Who is calling on the executive emergency line? Jordan brought the phone up to his face, eyes never leaving the captain. This is Jordan A. Pierce, NorthStar Flight 282. I'm having a serious problem with the crew. Andrew dropped the radio on the floor. Eli's eyes widened. Linda whispered, Oh my God. Jordan Pierce. Is that him? Someone in the back row asked quietly. Jordan Pierce. Is that Jordan Pierce from NorthStar? Rodriguez felt as if a boulder was pressing down on his shoulders. He took a half step back unconsciously. On the other end of the line, Amanda Brooks immediately changed her tone. Mr. Pierce, please tell me the situation. Jordan took a deep breath. His voice came out clear, slow, and steady. The flight captain just asked me to leave the plane without a valid reason. I have all my paperwork. I am sitting in the seat I purchased. I want the operator to know that this is happening right now. Rodriguez stood still. His face was white. Amanda replied immediately. I will intervene immediately. Well, please hold on. Jordan lowered the phone to his lap. He didn't say a word. just looked at the captain. A look not of anger, not of revenge, but of someone who has had enough. Rodriguez opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He had just realized he had gone too far. Too far to turn back without paying the price. The cabin was silent. It was the silence before the storm. The silence of people who knew from this moment on. Nothing on this flight would ever be the same again. Jordan straightened his back, eyes fixed forward. He didn't need to say more, because in a few minutes, everyone on this plane would know exactly who he was. Jordan held the phone in his hand, the light from the screen reflecting off his face, casting a thin line of light along the bridge of his nose. His hand was steady, not shaking. But his heart felt heavy, like a stone that had been placed there years ago. Years of enduring not just one, but dozens, hundreds of situations like this. But today, things are no longer the same. The whole cabin froze. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe. Everyone knew that the call, it was not normal. Andrew bent down to pick up the radio, his hands shaking slightly. Bending over a small device had never been more humiliating. Eli stood upright, but his eyes were glued to Jordan's face as if he couldn't look away. Because he knew something incredibly important was happening before his eyes. Linda leaned over, placing a hand lightly on the seat in front of her, as if to give Jordan strength without words. Mia held the phone in place, unmoving. She knew this moment would not be a clip for views, but a truth the world needed to see. Rodriguez stood still at the head of the aisle, his arms at his sides, his eyes dull. They were trembling not with fear of Jordan, but with fear of what he had just brought upon himself. Jordan put the phone to his ear when the line became hot again. Amanda's voice rang out clearly. Pierce. What exactly is the situation? I hear noises in the cabin. Is someone infringing on your rights? No one knew Jordan was the CEO? No one thought that the black man in the plain light blue shirt was the highest-ranking person at NorthStar Airlines, one of the 3 largest airlines in the United States. But the truth is still the truth. Jordan looked straight at Rodriguez, his voice low but filled with his usual calm. I am being asked to leave the plane despite presenting all my documents. The captain has given no valid reason other than failure to comply. I have cooperated. I only refuse to leave my seat without any evidence that I am a security risk. Amanda answered immediately, her voice thick with indignation, but held in professionalism. I understand. I'm holding an emergency meeting with the board right now. Please hold. Rodriguez heard every word. He swallowed, his throat as dry as the Nevada desert. Jordan lowered the phone to his lap, but didn't end the call. The cabin was no longer a cabin. It was more like a courtroom, a place where all eyes were focused on the truth they had been forced to witness all along. A young passenger in row 4E, an Asian man, quietly asked the person next to him, Jordan Pierce, is that the name of the CEO of NorthStar? The other replied softly, as if whispering a dangerous secret. I think so. I saw a picture in Forbes. As the whispers spread through the rows, the cabin changed completely. The suspicious looks turned to surprise. Those who had previously thought Jordan annoying now dared not look directly at his back. Even Robert Tate, the loudest voice, cowered, his face red as if he had been caught doing something wrong. Rodriguez began to feel weak in his legs. He felt like he was standing on the deck of a ship in a storm. But this storm wasn't the wind. It was his own doing. Jordan still didn't turn around. No gloating, no enjoying, just silence, a silence that made the cabin as tense as a bowstring. The phone in his hand vibrated again. Jordan raised it to his ear. Amanda said, slower this time, but sharper, Mr. Pierce. I'm connecting you to the executive vice president, Mr. Michael Lawson. He wants to hear it directly. A small click sounded. The line was transferred. An older man's voice, deep and authoritative, rang out, Mr. Pierce, this is Michael Lawson. I want to hear from you what's going on Flight 282. Jordan looked straight at the captain. His eyes were as calm as a lake in the early morning. Here's what's going on, Jordan said. The captain asked me to leave the plane for no reason. I cooperated, showed my papers, but I was still suspected. And now they've called security on the other end of the line? Lawson was silent for a few seconds, but it was the silence of someone holding back anger. Then he said, his voice as heavy as a hammer, "Give it to me, Captain." The cabin almost let out a wordless gasp. Jordan held the phone up to Rodriguez. No one said anything, but everyone knew this was the moment the truth was brought to light, and there was no escaping it. Rodriguez, his face as white as a sheet, walked slowly towards Jordan. Jordan did not pass the phone. He just raised his hand slightly, saying, "Come closer." Rodriguez felt his steps weighted like he was carrying a stone. Finally. He was standing right next to Jordan, just inches away. "Here's the phone," Jordan said softly. "They want to talk to you." Rodriguez picked up the phone as if it were hot. He raised it to his ear. "Captain Rodriguez here." Lawson's voice came from the other end of the line, sharp, tight, uncompromising. "Captain, I'm hearing reports that you're asking a passenger to leave the plane without a valid reason. Is that correct?" Rodriguez swallowed. I, I'm going through security. Why, has he caused any trouble?" "Not yet. He refused to provide documents." "No. But I feel something is wrong." "What's wrong?" Lawson asked, his voice extremely calm, but everyone could feel the heat rising. Rodriguez looked down at the floor, not daring to look at Jordan or any of the passengers. "I am not sure." Mia almost gasped out loud. Linda held her chest. Andrew stood frozen. Eli slowly bowed his head. Lawson continued, his voice as heavy as an anvil falling on steel. "I will ask one last time. Under what regulations did you ask that passenger to leave the plane?" Rodriguez clenched his fists on the phone. I can't tell." Everyone looked up at the same time. It was a moment when everyone understood the truth was out there. There was no taking it back. Rodriguez felt his knees go weak. He had to lean lightly on the back of the chair in front of him to steady himself. The final words from the other end of the line put the phone back to Mr. Pierce. Rodriguez handed the phone back, his hands shaking visibly. Jordan took it back and put it to his ear. "Mr. Pierce," Lawson said, his tone becoming one of absolute respect. "At this time, you are not required to leave the aircraft. On the contrary, Captain Rodriguez must leave the aircraft immediately." The whole cabin exploded in shock. Linda covered her mouth with her hand. Eli's eyes widened. Andrew fell back as if someone had punched him in the stomach. Mia clutched the phone tightly, her heart pounding. Robert Tate kept his head down, not daring to look at anyone. Rodriguez stood frozen. His face fell like a tower that had just been demolished. Jordan took a deep breath, a breath that held back a lot of his feelings. Today, he didn't want anyone to lose their jobs. But sometimes the truth had to be told. And the first-class cabin of Flight 282 was witnessing that truth, naked and with no way out. The words "Captain Rodriguez must leave the plane" immediately hung in the air like a jolt of electricity that had just passed through the ceiling of the cabin. No one had time to react. No one dared to breathe. The cabin froze in that moment, the power that had weighed down Jordan suddenly collapsed like a wall torn from its foundation. Rodriguez stood still, his broad shoulders shrinking. Only minutes ago, he had been the symbol of control, the only one on the plane with authority to give orders, the voice that no one could contradict. But now, he was like a man lost at sea. No boat, no wind. Just the truth, naked and so bright it hurt his eyes. Jordan kept the phone to his ear. He didn't look at Rodriguez. He didn't smile. He didn't look proud. His eyes were just dark, deep as a winter lake, a place where sadness and patience and old weariness coexist. On the other end of the line, Michael Lawson continued, "Pierce, I will conduct a formal investigation tonight. But right now, Captain Rodriguez, according to internal regulations, is no longer objective enough to continue on duty on the flight." Jordan nodded slightly. "Thank you." "Michael." Rodriguez closed his eyes for a moment. Perhaps he was looking for some support amid the chaos. But there was none. The laws of the sky are sometimes cruel. You can be in power 1 second, and the next, you're left alone. Lawson paused for a moment and continued. I'll hand the call back to the personnel support team. They'll coordinate the safe and speedy removal of the captain, Jordan said. Thank you. The call ended with a soft click. Soft, but it resonated deeply in the thoughts of those who were watching. Jordan set the phone down on his lap and exhaled slowly, as if a heavy stone had been dropped on his shoulder. He didn't look at anyone, nor did he need to explain. He had told the truth. He had kept his composure. As for the rest, he let the truth speak for itself. 2 airport security officers entered the cabin, not with fanfare, not with a show of force. They entered with the caution of men who knew they were in the midst of a media storm. One of them, tall, wearing an Officer Perry name tag, nodded to Rodriguez' captain. Please follow us. Rodriguez turned to Jordan. There was something strange in his eyes, not spite, not anger, but recognition. The recognition of someone who has just realized he was wrong in a moment when he should have been right. Sir, his voice was small, caught in his throat. I don't know who you are. Jordan looked at him gently. His gaze was not cold, not unfamiliar, but only a little sad. I don't need you to know who I am to be respected. The words pierced the cabin. No need to be loud. No need to be aggressive. A word so true, it silenced everyone. Rodriguez nodded slightly, like a man who had just realized something he should have learned decades ago. He turned away. 2 security guards escorted him out of the cabin. He slowed as he passed Jordan's row, as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't. In first class, no one whispered. No one jeered. No one laughed. There are moments when people know to be silent because the truth is so great that they cannot interrupt. When the cabin door closed, the closest person standing was Andrew Clark. His face was white, his temples throbbing with tension. Jordan looked at Andrew for a long time. Not to blame, nor to condemn, but as if to ask quietly, why do you think I'm the problem just by looking at me? Andrew bowed his head before Jordan could say a word. He stammered, Sir, I think something's wrong. Do you think, Jordan said softly, or do you feel Andrew clenched his hands? I don't know. Jordan nodded slightly without reproach. That's the problem. No one is born with prejudice. People learn it from habits, from what others say, from the looks of others, and sometimes from invisible fears that are not their own. Eli Turner, still standing nearby, took a deep breath and took a small step forward. His voice trembled. I'm sorry. I know you did nothing wrong. I just didn't have the courage to say it sooner. Jordan looked at Eli, his eyes softened. Courage doesn't always come in time, he said softly. But when it does, it's better than never. Eli bowed deeply, as if in thanks. Robert Tate sat in row 2A, trying to make himself as small as possible, shaking his hands as he removed his glasses. But Linda Morrow, the blonde woman, turned to him, her eyes cutting through the darkness like knives. Do you still think he doesn't belong here? Robert blushed, speechless. Linda looked over at Jordan, her eyes unbelievably warm after all the tension that had just occurred. I'm glad you stood your ground. Jordan smiled slightly. Thank you. Mia, the girl with the phone, took a step forward. Her voice was soft but powerful, I think. The whole country needs to see this. Not to shame anyone, but to see that this is still happening. Jordan looked into Mia's eyes. Her eyes weren't looking for drama. She wasn't shooting for views. She was shooting because she knew someone had to say something. Jordan nodded slightly. If that clip helps someone get treated better, let it speak. Mia smiled. A smile not of victory but of hope, as everyone was slowly regaining their composure. The cabin speaker came on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Grant Reed. We are preparing to take over flight control. Please hold your positions. We will be taking off slowly in a few minutes." The whole cabin breathed a collective sigh of relief. Jordan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. One thing was clear. He didn't want to put anyone out of a job. He just wanted to be treated like a human being, like any other passenger. But today, he knew he had to stand up, not just for himself, but for those who had been silent, who had been forced to retreat, who had been treated wrongly without the right to call upon higher authority. Jordan opened his eyes. Outside the window, the evening light was fading slowly, like a curtain falling to reveal the next scene of a larger story. The flight has not taken off yet. But one truth took flight in the hearts of all present when the cabin door closed after Captain Rodriguez left. The silence was so long that Jordan could hear the faint rumble of the engines beneath the fuselage. No one spoke for several seconds. No one wanted to be the one to break the unusual silence. It was no longer the silence of tension, but the silence of awareness. A new, powerful awareness, like when a light is turned on in a room that many people thought was lit before. Jordan opened his eyes. The pale yellow light from the cabin ceiling fell on his face, casting a soft glow on his cheeks. He sat up straighter and took a deep breath, his first since the storm had subsided. Linda Morrow turned to him, the corners of her eyes slightly red. "Are you okay?" Jordan nodded slightly, his voice low but soft. "I'm fine. Thank you." Linda pursed her lips, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Not everyone can stay calm like that. I think many people here have learned something from you." Jordan didn't reply, but there was a slight movement in his heart, not pride, but like the feeling of being able to breathe after months of holding it. From behind, someone stood up, an older man with silver hair, wearing a navy tweed jacket. Mr. Harold Jenkins, seat 3A. He spoke loud enough for the cabin to hear, but not shouting, "Sir, I just want to say one thing." Jordan turned his head slightly toward him. "I've been flying for over 30 years, Mr. Jenkins said, and I've seen a lot of things happen on airplanes. But I've never seen anyone face injustice so calmly. I respect you." The air seemed to vibrate. Jordan nodded slowly. "Thank you." Robert Tate, the loudest voice before him, sat in row 2A. He didn't stand up. He didn't dare stand up anymore. But he turned around, his hands clasped together stiffly. His face was red, whether from shame or fear. It was unclear. Mr. Tate stammered. About earlier, I exaggerated." Jordan looked at him a long time. Not angry, not hard. Just the look of someone who was used to forgiving things that shouldn't have happened. Jordan said softly, "The important thing is that you realize." Robert bowed his head. "Thank you. Thank you for not blaming me." Linda looked at Robert, her eyes sharp but not hateful. "Sometimes I apologize, not because I'm completely wrong, but because I want to become a better person." Robert swallowed, nodding slowly. Meanwhile, Eli Turner, the young flight attendant, stepped a little closer to Jordan. He tapped the back of his chair, signaling that he wanted to say something but didn't dare to say it. Jordan looked at him. Eli was slightly startled. "Sir, I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. I didn't know how to intervene at that time." Jordan shook his head. "It is not your job to interfere. It is your job to recognize what is right." Eli looked down at the floor, his shoulders shaking slightly, not from fear, but from pent-up emotion. "I am truly ashamed. I don't want to be the one who watches while others suffer injustice." Jordan placed his hands on the armrests of the chair, leaning slightly. "Eli, kindness doesn't always come at the right time. But if you keep at it, you'll know when to stand up." Eli pursed his lips and nodded slowly, as if the words had touched the deepest part of his heart. "Mia Torres." The girl filming took another step toward Jordan. She still held the phone, but she was no longer filming. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. It was the look of someone who had seen a truth big enough to change her perspective. "Sir," she said, her voice shaky but firm, "I want to thank you. Not for the videos, but for helping me realize that silence can sometimes be a form of complicity." Jordan looked at her for a long moment, his eyes softening noticeably. "You stood up when you had to. Not everyone can do that." Mia smiled softly. "Me too." The two looked at each other for a moment, not normal sympathy, but the connection of people who had stood on the side of truth. The co-pilot, First Officer Grant Reed, stepped out of the cockpit. He was young, his features serious, but his eyes sincere and not at all distant. "Passengers," he said in a low, even voice on behalf of the entire new crew, "I apologize for the incident." He looked straight at Jordan without flinching. "Sir, on behalf of the firm, I'm sorry for your experience." Jordan nodded slightly. "I hope this gets resolved properly, not just for me." Grant replied seriously, "It will be taken care of." The words were not loud but resounded deeply, like a promise. When Grant returned to the cockpit, the cabin fell silent again, but this time it was a gentle, lighter, more comfortable silence. Jordan let his hands fall, not because he had won, not because he wanted anyone to bow, but because he knew he had lived up to his billing. He did not stay silent. He did not bow his head. He did not let wrong pass as it always did in the lives of so many like him. He closed his eyes. From the window, the last rays of the setting sun touched his face, a warm light that was like the universe's affirmation that every action, no matter how small, could change something big. Jordan opened his eyes and looked out at the orange-red sky. There was a very old sadness in his heart, but mixed with it was a very new hope. Hopefully tomorrow, someone else in his situation won't have to call the board to sit in the same seat they paid for. Hopefully today's truth will pave the way for other passengers tomorrow. Hopefully, every flight will be a place where people are treated like humans. Nothing more. Nothing less. The first-class cabin slowly settled down, but the peace didn't last long. On the surface, no one raised their voices. No one cast wary glances at Jordan, but something else was growing. Quiet and strong waiting. Wait to see what happens next. Wait to see how much weight Jordan's phone call earlier really has. Jordan sat in 2A, silent. Everyone was looking at him, but he was staring out the window where the sky was slowly turning the deep purple of late afternoon. There was something about that look that made the cabin feel like it was in a very big moment, a moment before change. Linda leaned over and whispered, "Will you call Jordan didn't turn around?" Just said softly, "Like a breath I have to." That sentence alone sent a chill down the spine of some passengers. Jordan's phone vibrated in his hand. He looked at the screen. Without hesitation, he pressed the call button. Mia Torres raised her phone, but this time she didn't dial it. She looked at Jordan, seeing the struggle in his face, not anger, but responsibility. "Call connected?" The female assistant's voice rang out, clear but sharp. "Mr. Pierce, I'm opening a line for you to connect with the Denver operations room and the senior security team." Jordan leaned back in his chair, the cabin seemed to freeze. A small click. Then a deep, authoritative male voice came over the speakerphone. "Jordan, this is Samuel Briggs, Chief Operations Officer of NorthStar. What's going on Flight 282? The name startled Eli Turner. Linda's eyes widened. Robert Tate held his breath. Even Harold Jenkins sat up slightly, like a student waiting for roll call. Samuel Briggs was one of the most powerful men in the firm. Second only to Jordan in the leadership structure, Jordan spoke clearly. "Sam, I am being asked to leave my seat despite having all my papers. I am being suspected without reason. And the captain tried to call security on board to take me away." On the other end of the line, Briggs was silent for a few seconds. A silence that was enough to tell everyone he was angry. Not the loud kind of anger. The anger of someone who knows things are not only wrong, but gone too far. Briggs spoke up. "Who is the captain of the flight?" Jordan replied. "Luis Rodriguez." A deep sigh came through the phone. I see. Do you want me to take direct action now? Jordan looked straight ahead. There was no show in his eyes, only weariness and determination. Sam, he said, his voice low and deep like a drum. I want this to be handled transparently. I want everyone here to see that NorthStar does not tolerate injustice, even when the one being wronged is me. Briggs understood. You want me to go up to the cabin speaker? Jordan nodded. Yes. Seconds later, the cabin speaker system turned on. A male voice was so stern and authoritative that it drowned out all other sounds. Hello, passengers. I am Samuel Briggs, CEO of NorthStar Airlines. Mia inhaled sharply. Linda put her hand to her chest. Eli looked around, his face pale. Briggs continued. I am directly monitoring the entire incident through the internal monitoring and reporting system. I would like to inform... The cabin held its breath. All eyes turned to the ceiling speaker. Passenger Jordan A. Pierce has been identified as the CEO of NorthStar Airlines, and he is being discriminated against in an unacceptable way. A sound like gasps spread throughout the cabin. Robert Tate let his arms fall. Harold Jenkins nodded slightly, as if his thoughts were confirmed. Mia put her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide. Briggs continued, his voice slow, each word like a hammer pounding the air. Any unwarranted interference, questioning, or other inappropriate treatment of any passenger, especially based on racial bias, is completely against NorthStar policy. This moment was like a flash of lightning across the sky. Captain Rodriguez has been immediately removed from duty. A small noise came from the galley, the sound of something falling, probably from Andrew. Airport security is being asked to take over the situation. A new crew will be taking over the flight in a few minutes. Mia was out of breath. Linda covered her mouth with her hand. Eli stood there, frozen. Briggs ended with a sentence that sent shivers down anyone's spine. You will not witness any more injustice on this flight, and transparency will be guaranteed from this moment on. The speakers went dead. The cabin fell into a heavy silence. Jordan said nothing. He just put the phone down on the small table and let out a very light breath, as if a burden had just been lifted from his shoulders. Eli moved closer to Jordan, his voice trembling to the point of almost whispering. Sir, I really don't know. I don't know who you are. Jordan raised his hand slightly, interrupting. The important thing is that now you know what is right. Eli swallowed, his eyes red. I'm sorry I didn't do anything. Jordan looked him straight in the eye without reproach. You have a chance to do better. Don't waste it. Eli nodded vigorously, as if engraving that sentence into his heart. At the door, Robert Tate stood up. No one called. No one asked. But he stood up. He walked closer to Jordan, his voice breaking. Sir, I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. I was wrong. Jordan looked at him. Not coldly, not reproachfully. There was only sadness. Sadness because it wasn't the first time something like this had happened. And probably not the last. Jordan said, the important thing is that you realize you're wrong while it's still early. Robert bowed his head low, then returned to his chair much more quietly. Finally, Jordan looked out the window again. Outside, the purple sky was fading. A deeper blue was rising, like a rebirth. In that moment, Jordan understood. This storm was about more than him. It was opening a door much larger, and that door it will never close again. The cabin speaker blared again, but this time without the tension from before. The new female captain's voice, Captain Julia Martinez, was warm, deep, and steady as the ground after an earthquake. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Martinez. I will be taking over this flight. We appreciate your patience. NorthStar Airlines is committed to resuming travel in a safe and respectful manner. The cabin shook slightly as several people breathed a collective sigh of relief. A new feeling filled the airlight, warm and open, like a window cracked open after a long storm. Jordan sat still. All eyes were still on him, but no longer with suspicion, but with respect. and a little gratitude. Linda Morrow tilted her head and smiled slightly. At least we have a captain who knows how to listen. That's what I hope for on any flight. Jordan replied with a smile. In the front seat, Mr. Harold Jenkins popped the cap off his water bottle and turned around Jordan. People like you don't come around every day. I hope you understand that. Jordan nodded, but his eyes softened like someone hearing a compliment, but secretly wishing things wouldn't have to come to such a confrontation. The first-class cabin began to move. New flight attendants entered the cabin, two flight attendants, Sophia Lang and Marcus Hill, both with gentle but serious expressions. They bowed to each other, apologizing in turn for the earlier incident. Sophia stopped in front of Jordan, sir. We sincerely apologize for what happened. From now until the end of the flight, we will make sure you are served as you deserve. Jordan smiled. I appreciate that, and I expect you to treat all passengers the same. Sophia looked a little surprised, then smiled back a real smile. Yes, sir. To everyone. Marcus stood beside him, nodding. Those words were like a solid brick for a new beginning. In the cabin, no one spoke loudly. Each person was lost in their own thoughts. Mia Torres sat in row 4. She looked at her phone screen. The video she had just recorded had reached nearly 20,000 views in just 30 minutes. She let out a small sigh, not a tired sigh, but the sigh of someone who knows they're witnessing a moment bigger than they realize. She looked at Jordan. His gaze was still out the window, where the sky outside was darker, deeper, but not completely black. A thin strip of light like a shimmering path still ran along the horizon. Mia thought to herself, such a calm person. How could they think he would cause trouble? She sensed something deeper. Jordan's calm was not a resigned silence. It was the silence of someone who knew exactly who he was, and when to stand up. Behind him, Robert Tate sat motionless. His eyes were fixed on empty space like someone who had just realized he had helped push someone into an unnecessary war. Linda saw this and spoke softly. You know, apologizing is a good thing, but change is what is important. Robert swallowed hard. I know. I don't think I've ever seen myself so clearly. Every day is a chance to start over, Linda said, her voice as light as a cloth, wiping away a thin layer of dust. The important thing is not to close your eyes again. Robert nodded slowly. For the first time all flight, he was not trying to be right. As the cabin began to roll onto the runway, the engine hummed softly, not urgent, not loud, but an affirmation that this trip was finally about to begin. Jordan closed his eyes for a few seconds. In the darkness, he saw the image of his father, a black man who had worked in a steel mill for 30 years, always telling his son, you have to be calm, you have to be strong, but don't be silent when you need to speak up. Jordan opened his eyes. He knew he had done the right thing. But it means more than that. Captain Martinez came on the loudspeaker. NorthStar 282 is preparing for takeoff. Please fasten your seatbelts. The click of the seatbelt sounded like a soft chord, blending with the revving engine. The plane began to accelerate. Mia put her phone down, and for the first time all trip, she didn't turn it. She just watched the journey go by with silent awe. Eli stood in front of the cabin, hands behind his back, looking at Jordan. His eyes were no longer those of someone feeling guilty, but of someone who wanted to do better from today on. Linda placed her hand lightly on Jordan's chair and whispered, You've changed the way a lot of people look at you. Jordan replied in a low but warm voice, I just hope that one day, no one will have to go through something like this again. The plane lifted off the ground. The city lights below shrank to small, yellow streaks of light like candlelight in the night. The cabin went silent. For the first time all day, the silence felt comfortable. Light, safe, and hope. Jordan leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the night sky. Briggs's voice still echoed in his head, not as a subordinate, but as a friend standing beside him. I will make sure everything is transparent. Jordan smiled thinly, a rare smile, gentle but meaningful. I know. This flight has left the ground. But the bigger journey, the journey of changing the way people see each other, has only just begun. As the plane stabilized at cruising altitude, NorthStar 282 was bathed in the soft blue glow of the night cabin. Passengers relaxed, many leaning back in their seats, exhaling softly as if a long, stressful chapter was finally coming to a close. But for Jordan A. Pierce, another chapter is unfolding. He leaned his head back against the chair, his gaze fixed on the window. Outside, the clouds were thick as wool, reflecting the pale moonlight. It was a peaceful scene that was a complete contrast to the events of the past few hours. And in that peace, the thoughts that Jordan had been trying to keep deep inside suddenly surfaced. Eli Turner walked lightly towards Jordan, standing solemnly. "Sir, yeah, we are about to serve dinner. Would you like anything?" Jordan turned back, smiling slightly. "You choose for me. I believe in your choice." Eli paused slightly in surprise. Something in his eyes softened as if the statement had touched a part of him that he had tried to hide behind the modesty of a young flight attendant. "Yes, sir," Eli replied, his voice clearer, a little more confident. "I'll bring you an option I think you'll like." Jordan nodded. When Eli left, Jordan let out a small breath. Not tired, but a sigh of relief. Linda Morrow. The woman in seat 1C turned her chair slightly, replying slowly, "You know, Jordan, I believe you are not the only one who stood up today." Jordan turned, eyebrows raised slightly. "What do you mean?" Linda smiled gently. "I see it in the eyes of many people here. Maybe people don't say it out loud, but everyone is awakened. You are the one who ignited that awakening." Jordan shook his head, his voice soft. "I just did what anyone in my position should do." Linda looked deep into his eyes. "But not everyone has that courage. Jordan, not everyone can keep calm when they are treated so unfairly." Jordan was silent. In that silence, Linda saw not pride in him, but sadness. A long-standing sadness. Simmering, very real. "You're right," Jordan admitted, his voice a sigh held too long. "But if only people didn't have to have so much courage just to prove their innocence." Linda looked down at the floor for a moment, her heart sinking. Because those weren't just Jordan's words. They were the words of so many people out there. People who have been asked questions they shouldn't have been asked. Who have been doubted when they shouldn't have been doubted. Who have been kept silent because no one stood by them. Eli returned with 2 trays of food, placing one in front of Jordan. "Sir, I chose the Texas-style beef short rib for you. Tender, easy to eat, and I thought you might need something warm." Jordan smiled sincerely. "You have good intuition." Eli smiled sheepishly, then stepped back. But his eyes said more. They said he was going through a transformation he himself couldn't yet name. Behind her, Mia Torres opened her laptop and began writing down what she witnessed. Even though she was the one who filmed the video, she didn't want to tell this story as a scandal. She wanted to tell it as a lesson, something that forced people to look at themselves. But then she stopped typing. Mia looked up at Jordan. She saw him sitting there, thus his hands on his knees, his eyes not of a CEO who had just sought justice, but of someone with a concern that was bigger than a momentary insult. And in that moment, she realized this story goes deeper than what the camera can capture. Jordan put down his fork, glanced around the cabin, and then he said, not directed at anyone, but clearly audible to everyone listening. "All my life, I have tried to be calm in the face of things that are not calm, to stand in the position I am in today. I have had to endure more than people think. But each time, I tell myself, if I let it go, the person after me will have to endure more." Linda looked at Jordan, her eyes softening. "Is that why you became CEO?" Jordan chuckled. "No, I became CEO because I was good at my job. But I became who I am today because life forced me to be strong." He paused for a moment, then said softly, "And because I know there are people who would never sit in this chair if someone didn't stand up for them." Linda placed her hands lightly on the armrest of her chair. Jordan, you are changing the lives of so many people. Jordan looked into those sincere eyes, silent. This calm man did not need to answer, because Linda saw the answer in his eyes. The cabin darkened as the nightlights were turned on. People began to lean back, relax. A few passengers still glanced at Jordan silently, no longer with curiosity, but with a newfound respect. Eli walked over and said softly, "Sir, if you need anything else, just call." Jordan nodded. "Thank you." Eli took a deep breath as if gathering his courage. "Jordan, I want to say this. I've been a flight attendant for 4 years. Today was the first time I saw clearly the difference in the way people treat each other just because of a first glance." Jordan tilted his head. "How do you feel?" Eli squeezed her hand. "I felt ashamed, and I felt it was time for me to change." Jordan looked at the young man, his eyes lighting up in that moment. "You can do it, and then you can help others do the same." Eli couldn't help but smile. It was a small smile, but it was the smile of someone who had just walked through a new door. Jordan closed his eyes. In the darkness, he heard the engine hum like a lullaby, and for the first time that day, he let himself relax. He felt it clearly. He wasn't just on a flight. He was in the middle of a bigger journey, a journey he wasn't looking for, but one that came to him when he was ready. A passenger in row 4 whispered to the person next to him, "He makes me think of myself, of the times I was silent when I shouldn't have been." Jordan didn't hear that. But if he did, he would understand every action he took today was changing someone he'd never met. And that is sometimes many times more important than the CEO title. The plane began to descend, and the soft yellow lighting in the cabin gradually returned. No one was sleeping, and no one was speaking loudly. There was a kind of silence in the cabin, a silence that made one's heart beat a little slower because one knew something important was about to happen. Jordan opened his eyes as he felt the change in pressure. He looked out the window. Below, the lights of New York City were coming into view. A glowing map spread across the night sky. Eli Turner stepped forward and whispered, "Sir, we are about to land." Jordan nodded slightly. "I know. Thank you." Eli smiled and stepped back. But before leaving, he whispered as if to remind himself, "I will not forget today." Jordan. Jordan watched Eli's figure. He believed in the boy, and he believed that people like Eli could change the airline industry more than any policy. Linda Morrow adjusted the scarf around her shoulders and turned to Jordan. "Are you ready for what's coming?" Jordan let out a small breath. Not a sigh, but a gasp. "There are some things. Even if you prepare, you're still not really ready. You know?" Linda nodded, her eyes deepening beyond her calm exterior. "But you are not alone. Jordan, there are many out there waiting for you to speak up." Jordan looked down at his 3 fingers, clasped lightly together. "I just hope I'm strong enough to handle it." A few seconds of silence. Then Linda spoke slowly. "You are strong. And what I admire about you is you are strong but still have a soft heart." Jordan smiled slightly, a sad smile, but a genuine one. "I don't want to lose that software. If I lose it, I'll be like the things I'm trying to change." An announcement sounded. "NorthStar 282 is landing at LaGuardia. Please fasten your seatbelts." Jordan stared straight ahead. And then a series of whispers began to spread from the back seat. It wasn't annoyance or judgment. It was excitement. Some people adjusted their shirts. Some looked at their phone screens where Mia's video had racked up more than 3 million views in just a few hours. Mia Torres put down her laptop and looked out the window. She felt her hands shaking. Not from fear, but from the realization. She was on a flight that would be featured in future documentaries. She looked at Jordan, her eyes sparkling with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Respect, admiration, and a little bit of pity. She whispered, "Jordan, you changed a whole flight." Jordan replied softly, I just want to do the right thing. Mia smiled. Sometimes the right thing is what changes the world. As the plane's wheels touched down on the runway, there was a slight bounce. Just a small bounce. But for those in the cabin, it felt like the end of a stormy chapter. The wheels squealed. The engines lost power. NorthStar 282 slid slowly down runway 04. Jordan held the handrail in silence. Outside, neon lights reflected off the fuselage, like a long streak of light as if they had just been washed away from the stresses of a long day. As the plane came to a stop, the cabin speakers played a familiar signal. But just before the passengers stood up, a figure appeared at the front of the first-class cabin. It was Samuel Briggs, NorthStar's COO, who had spoken on the phone earlier. The whole cabin was almost dead silent. Briggs approached with a tense face but a determined look in his eyes. He looked around the cabin, especially at the passengers near Jordan. "Ladies and gentlemen," Briggs said loudly but not heavily, "I am here to make sure everything is handled properly." He turned to Jordan. His eyes changed softer, deeper. "Jordan, you don't have to say anything. We'll stand behind you." Jordan bowed slightly, as a thank you with few words but much meaning. Briggs turned to the new crew captain Martinez. "Thank you and your team for taking over so quickly." Captain Martinez nodded, his voice firm. "That's what we have to do." A group of airport security personnel appeared at the head of the passage, but this time, no one came to enforce, not a single one. They just stood there to escort Jordan and Briggs through the press area, which was filled with cameras and flashbulbs. Robert Tate bowed as Jordan passed him. "Jordan, thank you for teaching me a lesson." Jordan just put his hand on his shoulder and squeezed it gently. "What matters is what you do after that lesson." Robert choked out. "I understand. I will do better." Harold Jenkins touched Jordan's hand lightly. "You remind me that dignity is not a privilege, but a birthright?" Jordan replied softly. "Thank you for standing up in time." Linda smiled warmly. "Good luck, Jordan. And keep your heart the same as today." Jordan touched his hand lightly to his chest, an act of promise. "I will try." Mia said nothing. She just looked at Jordan as if she wanted to engrave that image in her mind. As Jordan passed by, she only had time to say one sentence. A sentence she would remember for the rest of her life. "You made me believe that one person can change the system." Jordan paused for a few seconds. His gaze fell. "It's not because I'm stronger than anyone," he said softly, "but because I can't let wrong become normal." Mia felt her nose sting. Jordan walked away. And as he left the cabin, everyone realized they had just witnessed something far beyond an aviation incident. They had just witnessed a transformative moment. A moment that will be told in Parliament, on the news, in stories told to their children and grandchildren about kindness, about courage, and how one calm black man shook a system that seemed immovable. Outside the glass doors of the NorthStar conference room at LaGuardia, the lights of New York City spread out like a carpet of light. The night was thick but never empty. It was the perfect backdrop for life's most important conversations. Jordan A. Pierce entered the conference room with the click of his boots on the wooden floor. There was no applause, no clicking of cameras, just a solemn silence, the silence of people waiting for the truth. At the head of the table stood Samuel Briggs, his hands clasped on the tabletop, his eyes fixed on Jordan with a mixture of respect and anxiety. Alongside Briggs are Margot Elise, Chief People Officer, Daniel Young, General Counsel, and Karen Shen, Chief Operating Officer for the New York region. Jordan took a long, slow, deep breath, not to calm himself, but to try to keep his emotions from entering the meeting. In his position, emotions were sometimes very expensive. Briggs began bluntly. "Jordan, we've all seen the video, and we need you to tell the whole story. From beginning to end. Leave nothing out. Don't soften any detail." Jordan pulled out a chair, sat down, back straight. Eyes calm. "I will tell exactly what happened." He began from the moment he boarded the plane, from the moment Andrew first looked at him with suspicion, to being asked over and over again for the papers he had already handed over. Jordan spoke slowly, concisely, clearly, without exaggeration. When he mentioned the unjustified request to leave her chair, Margot clenched her fists. Daniel Young bent down to take notes, his eyes flashing with suppressed anger. But Jordan kept his voice even, as if this were not the first time he had said such things. And that was what silenced the room. Not because the story was so surprising, but because it was so familiar to a successful black man. Briggs placed his hands on the table, his voice low. Jordan, I have to ask this. How did you feel at that time? A very simple sentence, but also the most difficult sentence. Jordan looked down at the table for a second, then looked up, his eyes as deep as the mountains. There are only two feelings. Copying is tired. Two is regret. Pity Karen frowned. Jordan nodded. Sorry because I know it's not the first time, and it won't be the last time someone has been treated like this. Sorry because it's not just about me. Sorry because I as a CEO can protect myself. But what about those who don't have a voice? The room was completely silent. So quiet you could hear the clock on the wall. Margot put her hand to her heart and whispered, You're right, and it hurts because you're right. Daniel Young put down his pen and pushed his glasses up his nose. I want to reiterate something for legal clarity. At this point, discriminatory behavior on an airplane can result in federal penalties. What you described, and what the video shows, is enough to launch a national investigation. Karen interjected. But Jordan, are you sure you want to go that far? This would rock the entire airline, and not just ours. It would create a chain reaction. Jordan replied without thinking. Good. If the system is broken, it should be broken for the truth. Briggs nodded vigorously. And I'll be right behind you. So will NorthStar? Jordan looked at Briggs, his eyes heavy with gratitude. Thank you, Sam. But this isn't just about today's incident. It's about what we as people with power have to do. Margot asked softly. Jordan, what do you want? Jordan placed his hands on the table, clasped them together, and bowed his head slightly before speaking. His voice was slow and very firm. I want a transparent report. I want all passengers invited to testify. I want all employees retrained. I want to create a new standard that no airline can ignore. He looked straight at each person. I want NorthStar to be the first airline that will never let anyone of any color be treated like I was today. The room was dead silent. Even the sound of the wind outside seemed to have stopped. Briggs put his hands on the table, leaned slightly, his eyes shining with a determination Jordan had never seen before. Then we start tonight. Karen opened her laptop. I will call the senior PR and legal team. We will prepare a press release. Margot stood up. I will immediately draft a new mandatory training program for all staff. Daniel Young flipped through the documents. I will work with a federal agency. This is not just a reaction. This is a message. Jordan sat quietly watching them. A warmth slowly rose in his heart, light but deep, like a fire shielded by the hands of those who understood right and wrong. It wasn't always that he stood up with someone standing beside him. But this time when he wasn't alone, wasn't. As the meeting adjourned, Briggs put his hand on Jordan's shoulder. You know, this is going to shake the industry, Jordan replied in a light voice. If the industry has to shake, then it needs to shake. Briggs smiled a sad but confident smile. You're not just the CEO of the company. You're becoming the voice of something bigger. Jordan did not answer immediately. He turned and looked out the window. New York City was bright. Those distant lights were like tens of thousands of eyes looking at him. Not because you were a victim, but because you choose not to be silent. And he understood clearly when one person does not remain silent. Many others will be given the opportunity to speak up. I just did the right thing, Jordan said softly, as if to himself. Briggs replied slowly, firmly. Sometimes the right thing needs someone strong enough to start. Jordan exhaled softly, a warmer, deeper breath. He knew it. Tomorrow would be a long day, and the day after would be even longer. But right now, in the midst of the lit room, among the faces standing beside him, Jordan felt more steadfast than ever. A new journey has begun. Not in the sky anymore, but down here, on the ground. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the large glass windows of NorthStar's Manhattan headquarters. The light streamed down the main lobby, spreading across the stone floor in warm streaks of gold silk. The city was still noisy, still crowded, but for Jordan, today, everything was a little brighter. He stepped out of the elevator, his white shirt pressed, his navy tie neatly tied. But the most refreshing thing about him wasn't his appearance, it was his eyes. A gaze that was firm, deep, and softer than yesterday. In the lobby, many employees were standing in a group, their eyes on him. No one said anything. But when he passed by, they stood straighter, as if to send a silent signal. "We saw what you did, and we stand with you." Jordan smiled slightly, nodding his head in greeting. He didn't need applause, and a respectful nod was enough. On the 32nd floor, Samuel Briggs was waiting for him in a small conference room overlooking the Hudson River. On the table were two files, one black, one dark blue, both thick and covered with headings. Briggs began Jordan. "We have two main issues today. The first is a transparent report on Flight 282. The second is a plan to completely reform internal standards." Jordan sat down and opened the black file first. The text was dense. Every passenger statement, every video clip was excerpted, every violation was analyzed. Jordan read slowly, very slowly, and every line he read made his chest tighten. Not because of the accusations he lived through them, but because of the solidarity of the passengers, people who didn't know him, didn't know who he was, but who stood up the moment they realized the injustice. "This is not my victory," Jordan whispered, almost to himself. "This is the victory of courage." Briggs leaned back in his chair and nodded. Yes, and it was the boost the industry needed for a long time. When Jordan opened the blue document, he saw only 4 bold words on the first page. NorthStar Dignity Protocol. Just below that is a smaller text recommended by Jordan A. Pierce. Jordan looked at Briggs. "You named it like this?" Briggs chuckled. "I just used your idea. NorthStar needs to be the first company to make dignity a standard of operation, not just a slogan." Jordan took a deep breath. He turned the page. The second page listed 12 broad points, all aimed at establishing a fair and transparent foundation. The regulation prohibits discrimination. Unbiased document verification process. Live-in flight reporting system. Implicit bias training for all employees. Traceable labor liability. Independent passenger response council. Transparent camera system with centralized storage. Standards for reviewing flight crew behavior. Mechanism to protect vulnerable passengers. 24-hour troubleshooting hotline. Make discrimination data public on a quarterly basis. The right to request an immediate investigation if the passenger suspects injustice. Jordan placed his hand on the page. It had been a long time since he felt such a grand plan could become a reality. "Sam," Jordan said softly, "this isn't just about improving the airline. This is about changing the culture." Briggs replied slowly, "We can't change the culture if no one starts it. And you, the man who was treated unfairly on your own airline, are the perfect person to write this." Jordan pursed his lips. A lump formed in his throat, as if someone had squeezed his heart and then released it. Not the pain, but the realization I'm standing at the intersection of 2 roads where a wounded past meets a hopeful future. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Eli Turner walked in, still in his uniform from last night, but his face noticeably brighter. "Sorry to bother you," Eli said, bowing slightly. "I just wanted to give you this." Jordan took the envelope from Eli. It read Passenger Feedback, Flight NS 282. Jordan opens. Inside were nearly 30 hastily filled out sheets of paper scribbled quickly on the cabin's makeshift table, but each sheet, each sentence, felt like a fragment of the truth. "I have never seen anyone treated like that. Thank you for standing up. Your actions made me think about myself. NorthStar needs more people like you. If I have children, I want them to live in a better world than this." Jordan stopped at a note written in shaky handwriting. "You don't deserve respect because you're a CEO." You deserve respect because you're a human being. Jordan sighed a long sigh, but a much lighter one. Eli whispered, passengers say if they had the choice again, they would still fly with NorthStar. Not because of the airline, but because of you. Briggs heard and crossed his arms slightly. This is no longer an accident. This is an awakening. Jordan put the papers back in the envelope, smoothing the surface as if it were a precious keepsake. He stood up. The sun is brighter like a blessing. Sam, Jordan said, his voice firm and bright. I'm ready. Briggs smiled. Then let's get started. As Jordan left the conference room, the staffers along the hallway stood up. No one cheered, no one applauded. They just stood there straight-backed, serious as if to say, you have spoken for us. Now we will follow you. Jordan felt his heart warm a warmth not of victory, but of confidence. He knew the journey ahead would be long, difficult, filled with opposition, doubt, and challenges, but he also knew he was no longer alone. Outside the headquarters, a gentle breeze blew across the avenue, carrying the warmth of the morning. Jordan looked up at the sky where planes were tearing through the clouds. He spoke softly as a promise to himself and to those who were once like him. No one should be judged by the color of their skin before they are heard with their heart. And he walked forward each step steady, each step clear like someone opening a new journey not only for himself, but for a generation of passengers, a generation of employees, a generation of people who will board future flights. Jordan Pierce's story reminds us of something so simple yet so often forgotten in modern life. Human dignity is never determined by the way others look at us. It lies in how we stand up when we are hurt, how we choose to remain kind even in the face of injustice. Older adults, those who have lived through many social changes, surely know the feeling of being hastily judged just because of our background, circumstances, age, or appearance. We have kept silent because we are tired. We have ignored because we want to be safe. But this story shows that just a moment of daring to speak the truth, even gently, calmly can create a change that is bigger than we think. The lesson is not to make us angry, but to make us remember, keep calm, even when being looked down upon. Choose to stand up straight instead of slouching, and believe that kindness has the power to change the system. If we persevere, not everyone has to be a CEO to make big changes, but everyone can start with themselves, be fair, respect others, and not let silence become complicity in injustice. This story is for anyone who has ever been judged wrongly and for anyone who wants to live a more just life. Thank you for listening to this story until the end. If it gives you hope, empathy, or reminds you of something in your own life, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe. That way, you can help spread the kindness stories further to those who also need to be heard and healed.